people are bound to ask, and understandably, what's the Lucan's method? What is it in the first place? And then how is it different? I start out distinguishing my definition of addiction because definitionally that's very important, and it kind of puts you on the right footing to understand the rest that I want to say about the Lucan's method. And because motivation is in my definition, I do have to distinguish it from motivational interviewing. And then I saw somewhere else somebody was doing motivational enhancement therapy. And the truth of the matter is I could have worked motivation into the descriptor, the label, for what I do in the rehab program. But it doesn't do justice to the definitional underpinnings, the theory underlying the method that I spent a lot of time, like 30 years, developing. And that, the physics of emotioning. And you know the title of the book, the full title of the book?
The new one?
The one that's not yet published? The Physics of Emotioning, a constructivist's understanding of the forces governing the motivation for volitional behavior. It's a mouthful.
I'm tired already.
Yeah, but motivation, the forces that govern that motivation, that is what I'm addressing in the theory. So as we apply some of what I've come to understand through the theory to the method, motivation is a carryover. But it's not motivational interviewing because it's based on my theory. And I've asked you two ahead of time to scope out a couple definitions. And one is the generic definition of motivation. The other is a specific but general a definition of what motivational interviewing is. Because I don't do motivational interviewing. On the other hand, if you were somebody that was schooled in that and you saw what I do, you would say, oh, he's doing his own brand of motivational interviewing. And, I'm not trying to steal his thunder, he's not trying to steal mine. What we have to do is clarify the distinction between the two. So to start with, my definition of addiction is crucial. People talk about addiction as a disease. People talk about addiction as a choice. And I actually don't do either. And people are then prone to say, well, what's that leave? And what it leaves is my definition of motivation for volitional behavior. So I see addiction as a motivated set of volitional behaviors, meaning the will is involved. Not, and I don't use volitional in the strict technical definition that Webster offers, because there it's really synonymous with voluntary. A good part of what occurs inside addiction that is governed by the will is happening without full conscious participation or full conscious awareness. So Freud was aware that we have unconscious motives. And I take that into account in my theory. That we're not aware of why we do things. It doesn't mean that our will isn't involved. It just doesn't have that conscious conversation we have with ourselves when you're standing in front of the counter at Baskin Robbins and you're talking to yourself about what you're going to order. Right? You're standing there discussing whether it's butter pecan or strawberry, and you might not realize that strawberry is already likely to win because your grandfather loved strawberry and you were thinking of your grandfather before you walked in but hardly even realized it. So you see, even while the person's standing there and they debrief them afterwards and say, you picked strawberry, what was that about? So I thought it through and I was, imagining what each would taste like, and I just sort of figured strawberry today, even though there's like a toss-up for me. I'm ambivalent, I like both of them. Well, did your grandfather have anything to do with your choice? No, what are you talking about? And yet he did. And so that contributed to your mouth moving and saying strawberry and your system choosing or selecting strawberry and you're not the least bit aware of it. You don't connect the dots inside your own conversation as you discuss your motivation with yourself. So I still consider that willful. My idea of the will covers unconscious territory, partially conscious territory, and this is why I also am given to talk a lot about trance as a key feature of addiction. So think about the common understanding we have about trance. Aren't you doing things against your will while you're in a trance? That's how we think of it. What do you think? Are you doing something against your will? When the bell rings, you're going to cluck like a chicken. Right? The bell rings, the clucking starts. Are you doing things against your will? We tend to describe it. We describe it like we are. According to my theory, we are not. Our will has just been submerged, so now it's operating without our conscious participation. It's still you. When you're dreaming, is your will involved in manufacturing the dream material? Has to be, right?
Yeah.
It's not somebody else outside making you dream it. But it's not the kind of willful activity that we normally think of as willful activity, because we tend to equate that with the conscious, generally fully conscious participation in the act. And therefore we're saying my will begins and ends with my conscious awareness. I don't make that assumption. The will covers all that territory, and it's a special category when we're aware and conscious. It's a different but also kind of important and special category when we're not fully conscious. So like a lot of what I do, I reserve the right to have my own definitions of things. So let's now entertain, what definitions we have found for motivation itself, and then motivational interviewing. So what did you get for motivation? Just say it out loud.
The reason or reasons one has for acting or behaving in a particular way. Then the other one is the general desire or willingness of someone to do something.
And so in the first definition, you have the reasons. I'm talking about the forces, right? So when they talk about reasons, really what they're implying is you would know what those reasons are. Right? What'd you do that for? I don't know. What was the reason for you doing that? I don't know. So what about that motivation? See, when we don't know the reason, it doesn't mean there isn't a reason, it means we're not aware of it. So yeah, everything happens for a reason. You're fond of that? People always do things for a reason, but they may not know themselves what the reasons are. So the only thing that's different there is whether we know what the reasons are or not. It's still the will generating the reason to act. Now, what's the reason I slipped and fell? That's an accident, isn't it? Did I intend to slip and fall?
Probably not.
No. So that's not willful, right? We don't will accidents. We will walking, and then we overlooked the bump in the road, and our foot caught it, and we tripped. It was an accident. We weren't intending to fall. We actually were intending to keep walking well and successfully. Oops, that's an oops moment, right? Is addiction an oops? Walking along, minding my own business, and fell into the rabbit hole. Do you see how some people, particularly if it's a disease, I didn't ask for the disease. What does my will have to do with it? I was born prone to develop an addiction. I have the addictive personality. I didn't ask for it. It's like it's an accident of nature, so to speak, right? No, it's not. We need to hold every addict accountable for their addiction. The disease, unfortunately, if you take it literally as a concept, kind of absolves them of personal responsibility. I understand we can assign accountability even when there is no personal responsibility. But I actually want every addict to be personally responsible and to recognize, not that they chose it because it wasn't strawberry versus butter pecan necessarily, but it was motivated by the grandfather that abused them. the trauma and the fallout from the trauma, the wounds, the fallout from the wounds, what I refer to as demoralization. That's what generates the force, conscious or unconscious, to willfully alter my mood states. The addict is responsible because this is willful behavior. The second definition you mentioned, desire, and really all they're doing is equating motivation with desire. And if we look at addiction as being motivated by desire, it only holds so much water. How do we explain the addict who's continuing when they're clear their desire is more to stop than to continue using? Well, something's hijacked the will there, right? Well, this is what we talk about trance. We do feel like the trance hijacks our will. It hijacks the conscious component of our will. And in fact, what I argue is the trance is something we willfully utilize so the system can get a job done based on what it's willing to do. I can't do this unless I'm in a trance. Time for a trance, now I can do it. Have you ever been to a costume party and seen that people act like they're drunk even without being inebriated? The costume gives them permission to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did the costume hijack their will? Right? You know, they feel a different kind of permissiveness based on anonymity. Think what's happened on the internet due to anonymity. Mm-hmm. People are showing their true colors, and they're pretty ugly, aren't they? Well, the anonymity supports them in showing aspects of their will that might even surprise them at times that wouldn't have shown up otherwise if there was an audience judging them, right? If they were going to be impacted by an audience's judgments. Permission to speak more freely. The hatred comes out, the contempt comes out, the disgust comes out, the meanness comes out, the darker side comes out. Pretty wild, isn't it? For a while I was given to reading the Yahoo threads, you know, in response to it. Like, almost didn't matter what the topic was, I just want to see how low humans can go. And they get this back and forth going between one and the other, you know. It's just so interesting. And you realize, you know, some of these guys, I'm just talking about the males, you know, they're probably little mousy pipsqueaks that are now like, you know, pounding their chest and acting like real rough and tough because there's no repercussion.
Yeah,
right?
They don't even see who he is.
They don't see who he is, and there's no way to, you know, track him down, and, you know, what are you going to do about it, right? So everybody's a David that could potentially be beating up all the Goliaths. And you know they want that opportunity, don't you? Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's buried inside David to want to bring down the Goliath. So addiction is a set of motivated behaviors, and the will is involved, whether we have conscious participation, partially conscious participation in it, or actually completely unconscious participation, the will is still involved. And so the changes that will make a difference are changes that will affect the will and the way that it operates at all levels. So you see what happens is we deal with the conscious aspect of the will and we talk to people and we get them all pumped up and they leave here, and all the unconscious aspects of the will supported by the trance end up undoing everything they've accomplished. And then they feel like multiple personality because they can only take ownership, they only take responsibility for the aspects of their will and the process of the will that they're consciously aware of. And they can disclaim responsibility for all those aspects of their willful behavior that they're less aware of. So my theory unifies the two under the concept of will. We're just looking at the separation of the different levels of consciousness in terms of what comes out. And I'm not really using the unconscious in the same sense that Freud was using. But that's a whole different conversation. Well, you don't want these things to be too long, do you? All right, so somebody would say, great, so you do a lot of motivation, you understand motivation. They're going to say, so how is this different from motivational interviewing? So would you read the piece that you have?
Yes. Motivational interviewing is a way of being with a client, not just a set of techniques for doing counseling. Motivational interviewing is a technique in which you become a helper in the change process and express acceptance of your client. It is a way to interact with substance-using clients, not merely as an adjunct to other therapeutic approaches, and a style of counseling that can help resolve the ambivalence that prevents clients from realizing personal goals. Motivational interviewing builds on Carl Rogers' optimistic and humanistic theories about people's capabilities for exercising free choice and changing through a process of self-actualization. The therapeutic relationship for both Rogerian and motivational interviewers is a democratic partnership. Your role in motivational interviewing is directive, with the goal of eliciting self-motivational statements and behavioral change from the client, in addition to creating client discrepancy to enhance motivation for positive change.
Okay, well, that's more than a mouthful. What you can recognize contained in that somewhat lengthy description is the idea that you're trusting the person to have the autonomy, self-driven energy to look at their ambivalence, which we do, and to come up with a good idea. Even if you're assisting it, they kind of feel like it's their own. So I like that there's that respect for the person's autonomy. There's also built into it the respect for the person's worldview, as crazy as it may be. And we have many discussions every day about the crazy worldview of partners and colleagues, not just clients. And so this craziness in other people's worldview abounds, because guess what? Unless they agree with me exactly, there's something crazy in their worldview, right? So you feel the same about me, and we tend to do that because we're pretty imperialistic about our worldview. Unless we can admit there's holes in our own worldview, and this is where I would have a little bit of trouble with the softness, the built-in softness of motivational interviewing, and I'm sure in the hands of some really skilled practitioners, some of that softness disappears, and they can drill down and get to the point without the client feeling invalidated. But that's an important piece. Don't invalidate the client. But you can punch somebody in the head, and you do it in a certain way that they feel validated. Right? You know what I'm talking about? You punch somebody in the head. I mean, they're being really stupid. You care about them, and you go, bah!
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and they go, okay, I needed that, right? And they couldn't even ask for it because it kind of defeats the, like, could you slap me? Nobody asked for the cold slap in the face. Well, think about it. It's sort of like they park themselves in a stubborn position relative to their ambivalence, and they're sort of spewing stupidity. They have an inkling that that's taking place. They can't stop themselves, and it's a little like Fonzie hitting the jukebox. You hit it just right so it gets back on track, and they go, thanks. I don't know how I would have gotten my way out of that, the spinning there in ridiculous land, but I appreciate you cared about me. That's why you did it, because it wasn't really an act of aggression. It was an aggressive act of love, and I talk about that. Right? So one caution I would have with that approach is maybe it would limit you when it's time to, play a little rough love, tough love, whatever. The other thing that I agree with there is it's sort of an overall approach as opposed to a set of techniques, and I look at this that way. My job, literally as I see it, if we're going to uncover unconscious or semi-conscious motives, if we're going to uncover that, the search and discovery process is likely to be a little jeopardizing, isn't it? This is stuff people don't want to see. The reason it's not seen, okay, some of that's attributable to blindness and ignorance. They don't know to look there. But by the time an addict comes in here, those do not knock cabinets have been knocked on. They're aware. They're dimly aware. They're just protecting them. They don't want to go there. Right? They're stubbornly refusing to give you the awareness that they do have about these partial blind spots or the unconscious motives. And they'll say to you, I don't know, maybe I just want to fuck myself over. I don't know why I keep doing it, right? They're willing to entertain that by the time they come in. And when you're speaking about somebody in denial, they're protecting these closeted motives from public scrutiny. You don't have the right to ask me about that. Right? Are you in pain? Are you stressed? Is that why you're using more? Shut up. They don't go there. You're not allowed to go there. By the time they come into treatment, willfully, I don't mean the people that are court ordered or whatnot, but they come into treatment willfully, they want to be called on their shit, don't they? Now, up to a point, it varies from person to person, but there's some part of them that hopes you find a way to call them on their shit so you can illuminate the blind spots, they could discover what's motivating them, and that brings along the hope that maybe they could do something different. Unfortunately, most people's ambivalence, particularly when we're talking about the aspects of ambivalence that live in the blind spot or the dark matter of their motivation, their overall set of motivations. It's kind of like a convoluted labyrinth of self-protective defenses and devices to avoid pain and avoid responsibility and avoid awareness all at the same time. So I like what they say about resistance. You have to have a kind of respectful dance with people's resistance. But again, you really don't want to be namby-pamby because we'll be working on you uncovering this labyrinth and untying this knot for years rather than weeks. Can't afford that.
Can you explain what labyrinth means?
Like a maze.
Okay. They won't.
Yeah, okay, well, that works, right? Labyrinth is a maze. Yeah, you could use a smaller word for that. So we start out now, we're sort of clarifying the definition, and the definition for me does involve the recognition of the role that emotions, and what I refer to as the physics of emotioning, play in determining the forces that govern motivation for willful behavior. Emotioning, we'll refer to it generically as the emotions, and the way that they interact with each other, their internal chemistry, let's say, the dance of their chemical makeup with each other, determines the force that governs the motivation. That is the force that governs the motivation. So we go back to the definition of motivation you read, and they talk about desire. But what about fear? And what about guilt? And what about anger? And what about shame? It's hardly just a matter of desire. Unless you want to say, I desire less fear, I desire less anger, I desire less shame, right? No. So shame and fear and anger and guilt and disgust, they all have their say in the matter. In fact, interest, it's important to understand interest and how that affects motivation. Desire is important, but it's one of 9 elements. It's not the only element. When we talk about motivation in general terms to the layman, they're talking about more like the incentive. What motivates you to get up in the morning? Like, what do you want? Well, even there, you ask that simple question, what do you want? Well, actually, I don't want to be homeless, right? It's not really what I want. I don't want to get out of bed. I feel a need to get out of bed, and I'm afraid if I don't get out of bed, I will be homeless. So why use the word desire there? It doesn't make any sense. So you desire to avoid homelessness, No, I'm afraid. It's a fear motivation. Desire doesn't feel like that. What does desire feel like? Use a word that describes the feeling state of desire.
Longing.
Longing. Yeah, hunger. Craving, right? Okay, well, what's a craving made of? Because this is the thing that sort of hangs up most people when they're trying to theorize about or define addiction. Craving. What's a craving consist of? Is it really cells in your body indicating an emptiness for a substance?
Pain avoidance.
Well, let's look at hunger as a parallel, right? You guys have experienced hunger once or twice in your life?
We were just talking about
Yeah.
that.
Physical hunger.
Yeah.
So when the cells get depleted, they need nourishment, they're sending out signals, and where do they send those signals to so that they gather and kind of, well, they send it to the brain, but where else do you feel hunger?
Stomach.
Your stomach, right. I'm empty, you feel that they call stomach distension. Yeah, and it's like, and is that not painful? It's not horribly painful. If you don't eat and you ignore the stomach, what happens next?
Get a headache.
You get a headache, or you start to feel weak,
Cranky.
right? Cranky. In other words, the signals start to spread out, right? So the cells are gathering their signaling messages in various locations that the mind is processing. And mood gets influenced, physical pain occurs, and yes, a clearly detectable longing, right? I need food, I want food. So the cells are participating, okay? The cells are participating. And if my cells are screaming for food and nourishment, and I drink a lot of water and I fill up on lettuce, I can handle the stomach distension, can't I? I feel much better, I'm good. Am I? Probably won't handle the weakness.
No,
No, it probably won't make the headache go away.
and no
There's a
nutrition.
headache.
But
Yeah.
you won't be, your stomach will be full.
I can handle the stomach as a piece of it. When the cells are clamoring for whatever they're clamoring for when it comes to addiction, let's just say there is a chemical component. My cells got used to having nicotine every, 45 minutes for years, except when sleeping or attending a movie or being in church. And so the cell was saying, a little like stomach distension, I don't know, kind of like lung hunger or something. I mean, where does that locate itself? The longing for a cigarette. It's not in the stomach, right? Would it be in the lungs? I don't know. Taste buds?
I think that it's more of a habit. I mean, yes, the nicotine does, but you do this, you want a cigarette. You do that, we want a cigarette. Even once the nicotine's out, that habit is what's the
Well, we're
hardest
still
to break.
trying to explain craving, because we got the general label of craving for all this stuff. The craving for heroin, the craving for alcohol, the craving for nicotine, craving for sex, craving for gambling, craving for whatever. And there is a longing. So something is in the desire department, is involved, right? The bodily location is a little mystifying. We can kind of see it with hunger, physical hunger, but it goes to various locations in a way, or various levels, right? The stomach distension just being one level. The weakness probably being more important. I'm like faint, I'm going to fall over if I don't eat, right? I can ignore the stomach distension, but if I keep ignoring the weakness, I know there's going to be a more serious consequence. I can feel it, right? And I know a Snickers bar or whatever is going to handle that. So craving is not a simple idea relative to cells' level of quantity of X or Y or Z. There's more to it than that. There's got to be more to it than that. And we all recognize that long after the chemical bond is broken between nicotine or heroin or alcohol and your cells, there's still craving that can happen. And in fact, we see people that emotionally eat who are craving more food long after the cells have been satisfied. We got all we need, thanks. No, we're having dessert. Right? Now, we call that emotional hunger, don't we? We generically refer to it. We realize that's a real thing. There's physical hunger and there's emotional hunger. You must have already satisfied the body's requirement for food and nourishment because you ate a lot. Now what's left? And what's left is emotional hunger. And so how much food can you eat so that you can end up satisfying the emotional hunger? You can't. You eat until you're in pain, and then you stop because of the pain, but as soon as you can, you get back to more eating, don't you? Right. Well, because, in fact, whatever the system is longing for, is hungry for, it's not happening at the cellular level. It's happening at the emotional level. So cells do cooperate in making our emotions take place, right? Our emotional responding take place. But it's not their depletion that is the source of it. And so I think when we look at addiction, you can look at the heavy-duty chemical dependency as being one factor, and it will create noise inside the cells, given its dance with amounts and the habit, how long you've been doing it, so that you got your cells, accustomed to a certain amount and certain timing. So when you break that bond, and that could be considered the physical withdrawal. When you break that bond, which is usually pretty short-lived, days or weeks, you can have years or even decades of emotional cravings if you don't change what's taking place there. So we're not dismissing the idea of chemical dependency completely, but we're recognizing is the lion's share of the challenge when it comes to a full and complete recovery is taking place at the emotional level. And that's what's important. I can't do enough heroin that it'll bring back my father who passed away. And if I get off the heroin and I kick the chemical dependency part, my longing for my father that I used to medicate with the heroin will continue to create cravings until I handle the grief. So that's what we do. We detox you, right? Get you off the chemical bond, or at least get that largely accomplished. And then we go to work on the remaining challenge, which is the larger challenge, isn't it? It's deeper, it's longer, and it's the thing that's going to cause you to trip up because we already got you detoxed.
Right.
Right? So this is the whole idea about the core issues. It's the emotional underpinnings. And again, I get back to the physics of emotion. And this is why this method is so successful. We're actually addressing, beyond the chemical dependency, the real nature of the emotional or psychological dependency. And when we break those bonds, when we alter that dynamic, recovery can be counted on. Recovery can be, I don't want to say guaranteed, but it can be robust, it can be solid. And ultimately, we have a firm belief in permanent recovery. Some of the emotional basics are resolved, and they're permanently resolved. Now, you go out of here and we handled the grief over your grandfather or your father, let's say, and you're kind of good to go for a long while, and then your mother passes away. Well, did we change, something at that level of your organization so that you now grieve differently? Because that was my experience. I grieved the loss of my father and the loss of my mother very differently. Because in the process of healing the grief related to my father, I dealt with me as a person who couldn't handle grief. It was at a deeper level of change. So when my mother died, I didn't succumb the same way. And you've had some of that experience,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, some of the things that would have tripped you up before because your changes were deep enough, they don't have the power to trip you up now. Although they tug on the strings a little bit,
Yes.
right? They pull, but you're different now.
Yes.
The pull would have taken you off the boat before. Now it just kind of like moves you a little to the left. And then you're aware of what it is and you pull back.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the stuff of permanent recovery. We're not saying that anybody is ever out of the woods because is there any way to guarantee that 16 tons won't fall on your head? That was a famous Monty Python skit. They would just be doing some sort of regular, some otherwise unrelated skit, and all of a sudden a 16-ton barbell would come and squash the person. That's Monty Python. Probably the audience has no idea who Monty Python is. But.
Probably not.
You're not missing anything, audience.
No, are you kidding? So I've got two millennials as kids, right? And so I told them about Monty Python, like, yeah, dad humor, right? And so we rented one of the Monty Python videos, and they were peeing themselves laughing. And then let's see another one, let's see another one. So,
Wow.
Gotta be because they're boys.
well, it's,
Gotta be because they're
it's
boys.
certainly boy humor, yeah, British boy humor is what it is. So. Slapstick for the more intellectually sophisticated child. But addiction's no laughing matter. So let's get back to that and take it seriously. So I know that wasn't as condensed as we might have liked, but I addressed a couple important points there. It is about motivation, but I have my own idea about motivation. It resembles motivational interviewing, but it's not the same. And all right, so let's clarify a little further. And I realize why some people have sort of expanded on the notion of motivational interviewing, like motivational enhancement, like I mentioned. Something to do with motivation and something to do with what I refer to as deconstructing ambivalence. But my particular way of going about it is guided by the basic emotions theory of Sylvan Tompkins. Again, modified a little bit by myself over the course of my study of it, but the systematic application of his view of the basic emotions as you might undertake motivational enhancement, and taking it a step further, realizing the link between feeling states, meaning, and action. And so you have to kind of read the book to get the long version of what all that means. But the deconstruction part, I do look at the notion that everybody's ambivalence is characteristically composed of some part fear, some part sadness, some part anger, some part disgust, some part contempt, some part guilt, some part shame, large part interest, some major part desire, and then sitting there all by itself at the end is joy. And I'll do a whole lecture series on joy itself because obviously people want to know about that. And this is what's interesting about joy. People have a hunger for joy, don't they?
Yes.
Yeah. And one of the things that they don't recognize is their hunger for joy mitigates the possibility of their obtaining joy. And when they can't get joy by pursuing it, they settle for enjoyment. And this again is part of why the rabbit gets chased in the first place. The poor substitute that enjoyment is, which is procurable, which is something we can engineer or manufacture, while joy is not. So we'll kind of tease the audience with that one. They have to stay tuned for that. Questions?
Oh, that was good.
Yeah, I want to know about joy.
You have a hunger for joy, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
It comes from Jesus.
Oh,
well, there's a link between joy and love, which is why you can say that and get away with it. Joy is not supplied from the outside. If you recognize that, if you believe that God gave us the capacity to love, then He gave us the access to joy. And why do we misplace that? Why do we lose touch with that? Because we move into fear and we respond to our wounds and our hurts. And that's what preoccupies us. And so our awareness of the link between love and joy disappears as we live out of not love or less than love. And love being really, on a fundamental level, acceptance. You can see joy as a natural expression of real acceptance happening. Right? So I find this unacceptable, I find that unacceptable, I find the other thing unacceptable, but I'm looking for joy. Think about it.
Yeah.
Right? Keep looking. And as soon as it gets acceptable, I will enjoy it. Yeah, but you still won't know joy. Because that stance, this is unacceptable, is a stance of rejection, not love. It's actually hostile.
yeah.
So God gave you a shit sandwich, didn't He?
Yes.
Did you put mayonnaise on it? And enjoy it?
No, I threw it back at the world.
Yeah. And so, and the angry refusal of the world never produces joy. Never has, never will, right?
No, it certainly
No. The best it produces is the less than satisfying last word when somebody you're angry at trips on a banana peel, right?
Yeah.
The schadenfreude of it. No, so it is fair enough to link love with joy because I'm open to accepting the world, even really appreciating the world, being grateful for the world, just as it is. That's what love is. Well, guess what? You just got hit with the joystick too. They go together. And you see this with the infant. Like, everything's good. Like I have no complaint, you know? So I'm just kind of hanging out, all lit up, joyful.
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't that cool? And then, you know, I get diaper rash or I get cold or hungry, like, eh. You know, I'm not feeling good. I have pain.
You're a bad baby.
Yeah, I like that, baby.
Well, bad baby, think about that as an expression. I mean, how to take somebody out of joy by shaming them when they're young and vulnerable. And they could spend the rest of their life trying to get back to being okay based on you having the power to withhold validation. Right? And that's quite a fight. I mean, it's hard for us to come out from under that because, you know, when we were little, that validation means everything. And later on, somebody's saying, I don't care what other people think of me. It's like, that's bullshit.
Yeah,
you
correct.
do, right? So how do you really get to the point where you don't care what other people think of you? Well, the truth is, it helps if they think nice things of you. That makes it easier, right? Well, this is what I was saying about wandering through the woods and not wanting the bears to be chasing me and this feeling. I don't want that. You know, contrary to popular belief, I'd really rather not be crucified. Are we going to sell out to make that not happen? No, then you live fear-based.
That's right.
Yeah, so, you know, it's like, It does seem to be that there's a sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't aspect to living. It's pretty challenging. It's a labyrinth.
But I never had joy, that I can ever remember, maybe once or twice, but I don't ever remember having joy until extremely recently. Never.
Right. So all you knew was the pursuit of enjoyment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, cake is enjoyable, right? You know, whatever. You know, good feeling, good times, whatever. Safe. I mean, you didn't even have safety, so a baby can't have joy when they're not safe. They're preoccupied with, I'm not safe. Why aren't you smiling? I'm not safe.
I'm trying to let people not kill me.
Exactly. Make me safe, and I think my system can handle generating joy at that point.